Let's make dough. Hi, I'm Elaine from Food Bod Sourdough, and you join me here today in my home kitchen for me to be able to show you how I make my master recipe. I'm also going to be telling you about the flour that I use. I've got a selection here to show you, but we're making this loaf with strong white bread flour. So this is the simplest way that you will ever find to make sourdough. This simple, no fuss, faff-free way of making sourdough to suit you, to fit into your kitchen, to fit into life, because I'm a home baker, I'm a mum, that's the way we do it. And the aim here is to show you how the dough is going to feel, what the steps of the process are. So before we go any further, let me just talk about equipment so that you know the ideal things that I would use to make this dough. We've got our starter already fed and raring to go. Flour, I'm going to use Cotswold flour Churchill's white to make this loaf. But you could also use the strong white bread flour, you could also use the Canadian flour, or you could use their new regenerative all-purpose white flour. All of them work in the same way with my recipe. So if you choose to use any of these flours, they will all work, and you don't need to amend the recipe in any way to allow for the flours. So on this occasion, I'm going to stick with Churchill's. That's what I like to use in my kitchen. I like to feed my starter with the strong white bread flour. But on occasions, I like to use these as well. But also, I like to use lots of other flours and mix things up. So there will be other videos coming to show using different flours. But on this occasion, we're going to focus on using strong white bread flour. So this is perfect for everyday making of sourdough. However, whether you make it once a week, once a fortnight, daily, this is going to be an easy way for you to do it. Also, if you are brand new to sourdough, this is a great starting point. Starting with strong white bread flour is the perfect starting point for you making sourdough, because of how it's going to behave, the simplicity, the loaves you're going to create. So the whole purpose of what we're doing, the whole purpose of this is to be making fabulous sourdough loaves. Loaves that, we're going to want to just slap the butter on, and to be able to make them simply and easily. And yes, I'm going to say simple a lot of times because that's how I keep things. So the starting point, we've got our flour, we've got our starter, water. I use tap water straight from the tap. As it comes, cold, I don't do anything else with it. Majority of you will be absolutely fine using your tap water. Bowl. I use, this is a Duralex 23 centimetre diameter bowl. And the reason I use this is because I discovered quite by chance that it's the perfect size for measuring how well proved your dough is. And if knowing when your dough is proved is something you struggle with, this is the answer, because you'll see later when the dough is at a nice level on this bowl, it's ideal. So this equates to about a 2¼ litre bowl, I believe. But if you can find one of these, and you can find them online in the UK or from Shanna's Sourdough in the States, they're really, really useful for being able to measure how your dough is proving. We've also got digital scales. They make a real difference. They make life a whole lot easier for making your dough and making it successfully. I have a big tablespoon, stainless steel tablespoon, because that's what I like to first mix my dough up with, but also a bowl scraper, which you'll see me use as time goes on. We also have a shower cap. I like to use shower caps to cover my bowl when the dough is proving. There's a couple of reasons, partly because you need to cover your dough with something sufficient. If you just leave it uncovered or you use just a cloth, the surface of the dough will dry out, and the dry surface is heavy, and therefore the dough will struggle to grow to the size we want it to. But also, by using a shower cap, you have space to grow. So if you just covered it with a plate, and your dough grew a lot, then it would be sticking to the plate at the bottom. So when the dough proves, it produces gases. The gases can be caught by the shower cap. It doesn't matter if it blows up a bit. But you will also discover as well during the process, because making sourdough is all about fermentation. Fermentation creates heat, it creates gases, it creates condensation. So you will find later on when you take the shower cap off that it will be damp inside, which is also normal. But I've jumped ahead, surprise, surprise. So as we move on, once the dough is fully proved, we're going to need a banneton. A banneton is basically a proving basket. So this is a Brockform wood pulp banneton. They are listed as being for 500 to 750 grams of flour. They measure about 21.5 centimeters across. And these are perfect. They're a perfect shape for my size of dough, or for a dough that you're making with 500 grams of flour. And you can find these online easily in the UK. I get mine from Eco Baker in the UK, and again you can find them at Shanna Sourdough in the States, or look online. If all you can find is a cane banneton, then look for one that is 8-inch diameter or 22 centimeters across. If you end up with one that's bigger, it will make a difference to your dough. Smaller is actually better if that's all you can find. So that's our banneton, and inside it's dusted with rice flour. So that's what I've got in here. And the rice flour is to stop your dough from sticking when it goes into the banneton. And it's rice flour because rice flour is gluten-free and it's not porous. So therefore, if you are having something damp against it, it's not going to create a paste. So when your dough goes into the banneton, again, there's going to be moisture. So by using the rice flour, you stop that moisture from sticking to your banneton and becoming gummy. As we move on, this is the pan I use for baking. This is a really lightweight, easy to use enamel roaster. Might be the kind of thing that you've seen, people in the past using to roast your chicken in. This is what I use for all my bread. This is what I was introduced to using right at the beginning when I first made sourdough. And I have had these now probably over 10 years. So this is a really lightweight Falcon enamel roaster. Again, you can find them online from the people that I've said earlier. This one is 26 centimeters in diameter, perfect for my master recipe. They heat up quickly, they warm down quickly, cool down quickly even. They're not expensive and they do the job perfectly. I line it with parchment paper, and you need good quality parchment paper. It cannot be greaseproof paper or waxed paper because that will stick to the bottom of your loaf. And after all that hard work, it's the last thing that you want. So good quality parchment paper. Along the way as well, we need a lane. A lane is basically your razor blade for scoring the dough. I'll explain why we do that later. And it's the handle, basically, that holds your razor blade. And I've got a rack for cooling the loaf later. So this is the basic equipment that I use for making my sourdough. There's also salt, but you'll see that in use as we put it together. So that's all I use for making my dough. We're going to start making now so I can show you. So within this video, I will be showing you the process of beginning to mix the dough and then the handling as we put the dough together. We'll then be able to show you a fully proved dough, turning it out, scoring it and baking it, so you can see all the steps all the way along. So yes, I have about 9 bowls of dough around me so that you can see all the stages, and so that my lovely photographer, videographer on this occasion, does not need to stay overnight for the proving. So you'll be able to see all the stages within this video. So let's mix up some dough. So what I'm going to show you is basically what I do every week. This is my standard, simple master recipe. These are the standard quantities that I use with my strong white bread flour. So the first thing I want is my bowl sitting on the scales on so that they're down to 0. So we start with it at 0. And what I want in first is my starter. Now I know, because I've had this discussion in my Facebook group, people put their ingredients in a bowl in all different orders, because we had a post about this at one point to see what order people put them in the bowl. I always go a certain way. I go starter, water, flour, salt, as you will see. But if you go in a different order, it also won't matter, as was proved by the post and the discussion that we had. So I fed my starter earlier. She's ready to go. I want, look at that. I want 50 grams of my lovely, happy sourdough starter. Now, if you want to know more about sourdough starters, you want any tips or any guidance on making a starter, we also have a full video of how to make a starter online that you can see exactly how I do this, and it includes lots of hints and tips for you. So we've got 50 grams. I tend to then just leave my spoon in the bowl, put it back down to 0. Lid back on the starter. That will go back into the fridge until next time. So we've got our 50 grams of starter in the bowl. We're back down to 0. I'm now going to add 350 grams of water. So as I said, this is tap water, straight from my tap, cold, nothing special done to it. You don't need warm water. You don't need specially blessed water. If you live somewhere where you feel that your water is very heavily chlorinated, fill a jug with water and leave it on the counter overnight, and the chlorine will evaporate off. You don't need to do anything else special with it. If you have soft water, you'll need to use less in this recipe. So my water is quite hard. It makes no difference. But if you have particularly soft water, or you use filtered water, use 325 grams of water instead of 350. And I talk about my water in grams because I weigh it. Because my bowl is already on the scales and I put it back down to 0, I tend to weigh my water as well. That's why I talk about it in grams instead of milliliters. So in with the water. I did pre-prepare this. So there should be 350 grams. If you put the water in and it's 2 grams over or 2 grams under, it's really not a problem. So don't be worrying about that. And all I'm going to do is just give the starter a bit of a swish about, just so it just lifts it from the bottom of the bowl. There's no special reason, it's just a habit. So I'm going to put that back down to 0 again. So we have the starter, we have the water, the spoon is still sitting in there. And then I want my flour. So with this recipe, we are using 500 grams of strong white bread flour. Look at that. Okay, again, should you tip in 502 grams or 497 grams, it's not going to be a problem, okay? So we have our 500 grams of flour. Salt, any table salt is fine. I use the pink Himalayan stuff because I like it, not for any special reason. And I just want a teaspoonful. I am well known for not using a lot of salt in my recipes. So if you make the recipe and you feel you need more salt, then do go for it. For me, I keep the salt quite low. So that's all the ingredients. I'm now going to take it off the scale just to make it easier to mix. And I tend to do all this by hand because I prefer the process. But you could do this first part in a mixer if you want to. Just do a slow starting point of mixing it so you don't send the flour everywhere. And just all we want at this point, you see, it's just a joy. It's just a joy to just move it around. All we want at this point is to get the flour or the water through the flour. That is our key aim here. It doesn't have to be any special mix. It just needs to be a really rough mix. So what you'll see is this looks really, really raggy at the moment. Okay, and I'm going to go in with my bowl scraper to tidy it up. But it doesn't need to be anything better than that. So top tip, every utensil that you use, your bowl, spoon, anything, put them into cold water. Do not put them in hot water because it will cook the sourdough onto your utensils or your bowls. Get them into cold water first so that the sourdough soaks off it. If you put them straight into your dishwasher, the dishwasher will basically cook it, your dough or your starter, onto whatever you've used. So all I'm doing here is I'm just making sure it's a bit more well mixed in, so we haven't got any dry flour sitting around. And I don't need it to be particularly tidy. I tend to scrape the bowl round as I go because I'm like that. And we just want it literally, I mean, you could keep going, depends how, you know, but you don't need to. We just want every scrap we can off there, a raggy, rough dough. That's all it needs to be. And that is it. That is the first stage of your process. Now, what I forgot to say at the beginning is even though the process of making a sourdough loaf can cover 24 hours, if you want to go from the point of feeding your starter, letting it be ready, to the time that you've actually cooked and baked the loaf. But the actual hands-on time is only about half an hour. So this is not a full-on, over-the-top process. You know, it doesn't have to take over your life. You can easily fit it in with what you do, and it's not going to take you a lot of time to put the dough together. So that's the first stage of our dough. My utensils are going to go into a bowl in my sink that is ready and waiting. Shower cap on the bowl. So this now just needs to sit on your counter. There's nothing else you need to do with it. Just going to sit it on the counter for at least an hour. I tend to do it nowadays for 2 hours. You just want to let it sit so that the flour starts to absorb the water, which is going to make it easier to work with. Your dough will not start growing at this point. It's not going to start growing yet, and it doesn't need to. This is sourdough. This is a long process. This is a long, slow proving process. So you're not going to see much change yet. So this is going to sit on the counter for a couple of hours. And as if by magic, I can show you now what it will look like after that couple of hours. Just like this. So after it's sat there for a couple of hours and the colour of the dots on your shower cap has magically changed, what you'll see is this. So the dough has spread out. It's a little bit shiny. It's a little bit lumpy. But this is perfect. This is how we want it to look. So this is now ready for us to start building up the strength and structure in this dough. So this is when we start to do the pulls and folds on the dough. With sourdough, with my recipe anyway, there's no heavy kneading involved. I also never turn the dough out onto the counter, partly because I like things tidy and partly because there's no need to. You don't need flour everywhere. It's all done in the bowl. So with this first set of actions, what we're aiming to do is stretch and pull the dough so that we mix everything through. You mix the starter through and you start to wake it up. So you're giving the gluten a workout, you're starting to create this strength in your dough. So literally all we want to do is take a small handful. I've just got my thumb and first 2 or 3 fingers and lift across the bowl. And again, up and over. I'm going to just do this round and round the bowl. You see how stretchy it is? That's because we've left it there for the flour to absorb the water. And this is all the action is. We're just coming up and across, up and across. And there's going to be another 3 sets of these, but this is the most that you will do. Something I've been asked about recently is how many exact actions are there? Let me tell you, there is no number. You can't have an exact number of how many actions is required, because it all depends on your dough and it depends on the flour you're using. So all you want to do is do it enough times that you get to the point where you've got a really lovely, smooth, firm ball of dough. And the dough literally will not let you do anymore because it's becoming tight. It's too difficult to actually stretch it anymore. So what you want is this lovely ball of dough. It's just going to sit back in your bowl. This is also the stickiest your dough will be. After this, it won't be as sticky. So just a nice ball that sits in your bowl. It's not going to stay in that ball, but that's the point at which you can stop. And then put the shower cap back on. And this again just sits on your counter. I would leave it anything between 45 and 90 minutes. Again, it doesn't need to be anything fixed. You don't need to set a timer. You don't need to fix your life by it. Do it as and when you get past it, but at least give the dough at least half an hour to rest before you do the next set. So what will happen is you leave this on the counter and you come back to it again to do another set, and this is what you'll find. As if by magic. We change colours again. So what you'll find after leaving it for that period of time is your dough has spread out. This is normal. This is what we want. It's not growing yet. It's just spread out and loosened. So I want to do the same thing again. Up and over. And what you'll see now is look how smooth that is. It's almost silky. We just want to do the same thing again. And the reason for doing these is to build up the structure in your dough. It's worth doing. If you don't do them, you will have a looser dough later and it will spread when you turn it out. So it's worth doing them. And all this is going to take is 30 seconds if you're lucky to pull it into that tight ball again. So it's not a long process. It's not a sticky process. And again, you're back into a nice tight ball. And you can already see when you look in the dough, I don't know how much you can pick up on this in the video, you'll already see dimples in the dough where your starter is starting to work. And those lovely little bubbles and dimples in it, that's what's going to make the texture that we're looking for in your dough. So we've got that into our nice ball and we're going to cover it again. Keep in mind, the only reason that I've got any dough on my fingers is because I already mixed the first one, which is stickier. Otherwise, there wouldn't be any at all. But look as well at how clean the bowl is, because the dough virtually cleans the bowl as you go. We cover it again, we let it sit again, and then when we come back to it, magically, different coloured spots again. Again, it will have spread. And we just do the same thing again. Now, this is the third time. We'd also do this one more time. I haven't got another bowl to show you that again because it's going to look exactly the same. So after this, I'd cover the ball again, cover the bowl with its beautiful ball of dough in it, leave it again, do it one more time. So on each occasion, give the dough, like I said, at least 30 minutes between each action if you can. 45 minutes, an hour, if not a bit longer, is absolutely fine. And you will see you can't stretch it anymore. It was not going to let you. That is when you stop. That's when you stop and we have our lovely ball of dough. Again, it gets covered and left on the counter. So after we've done this one more time is when put the shell cap back on and leave the dough to prove. So this needs to now, once it's done the fourth time, that's when I would sit it on the counter to prove overnight. So in my standard master recipe, prove the dough on the counter overnight. There are other versions of my recipes, the same day versions if you want to speed it up or you want to be able to watch the dough. But for me, I prove my dough on the counter overnight, typically for 9 to 10 hours, assuming a room temperature of between 18 and 20 degrees centigrade. So this reminds me of the other thing that I should have shown you. The other key piece of equipment I use for making sourdough is my room thermometer. This makes all the difference to your understanding of how your sourdough works. I will explain more in a minute when you see a different dough, but this really helps you to understand what your dough is going to do. So my master recipe is based on using 50 grams of starter with 500 grams of flour and proving it overnight for 9 to 10 hours, assuming a room temperature of between 18 and 20 degrees. If your room temperature is lower, your dough will take longer to prove fully. If your room temperature is higher, it will be faster or it just needs less starter. So I'm not going to go more deeply into that right now, but you will easily find those tips and those answers on the Matthews website and on my website, in my books. It's all there, but it's very, very easy to manage. So for now, we're going to leave this to prove overnight and we will come back and show you what well-proved dough looks like. Here we are back with the dough. So this dough has proved overnight. Whether you do it overnight or you want to do it during the day, what we want at this point is a fully proved dough. So if you think the dough that you left to prove last night was like that, that's how it was left before you proved it. By the next morning, this is the aim. So if you don't have one of these bowls, and they really help, just look for your dough to double in size. If you need some help to see the difference with that, take a photo when you leave your dough the night before so that you have something to compare it to. So this is the dough that we left, we'll now be leaving to prove. This is our fully proved dough. So how can you tell it's fully proved? It's filling the bowl to where I want it to. It's up to the lip on my bowl, which is great. If you don't have a bowl like mine, look for it to double in size and have a virtually smooth surface. Want it virtually smooth, there might be the odd bubble, and with a slight upward dome. So this is a really happily well-proved bowl of dough. Let me show you something as a comparison, just to show you. If you have a bowl of dough like this, okay, you'll see why it's got an extra bowl over the top. If you have a great big bubbly wobbly bowl of dough like this, you probably think, oh, that's fabulous. Yeah, to a certain extent it is, because it shows that your starter's doing its job. But this dough is overproving. This is overproved dough. So if you have got a really bubbly bowl of dough, it either had too much water in from the start, or it overproved, or both. All of which are easily fixed. But if you've got a bowl of dough like this, it's going to be very sticky. It's going to be very hard to actually pull it into any kind of shape. And the best thing to do with a bowl of dough like this is turn it into focaccia. And you can see, again, recipes for that and tips for that on my website, in my book. If you are looking for a book to refer to for making my sourdough and for the best set of tips, if you look for my book, The Sourdough Whisperer, that will help. Or my brand new book coming out at the end of 2024, The Sourdough Bible. It's got even more information. So if you need a reference, then they can help you. But this, look at it. It's still bubbling. It just keeps going. I know it looks fabulous. I know it's exciting, but this is an overproofed bowl of dough. And this will be, oh, look at that. This will be very, very difficult to pull into a dough that's going to hold its shape. So either, depends what point it's at. If there's still some structure in it, pull it together and put it into a sandwich loaf or a loaf pan so you can make a sandwich loaf, or use it for focaccia. But that's a whole other video. So for now, I'm going to put that to one side. So this is not what you're aiming for. This is what you're aiming for. Doesn't look as exciting, but that's what we want. So let me get rid of that. Just going to keep growing. I find it very difficult to overproof dough because I want my dough well proofed, but it's actually quite good fun when you do it. So this is my well proofed bowl of dough, and we want this into a nice tight ball to go into the banneton. So I don't turn the dough out, I do it all in the bowl. So we've got our banneton we talked about at the beginning of the video. Rice flour. It's already got a layer of rice flour in there from what I've put in before to prep it, and when I've used it, I tend to just sprinkle an extra bit. And all we want to do with this bowl is exactly, this bowl is exactly the same actions as we did to build up the tension, to build up the structure in the dough. So we want to do exactly the same actions. Up and over. Up and over. And the intention here is to pull this into a nice tight ball. So don't worry about being firm with it. And actually, if you're not firm with it, it tends to create a problem. One of the questions I tend to ask people when they're asking me about their loaves is, did you pull it tightly enough? It needs to be firm. If you don't pull this tightly enough now, it will spread when you turn it out. But also, look, you can't overdo it. You literally can't squash the life out of it because there's too much in there. If you have made a decent, structured dough, you could sit on this and it would still bounce up and grow well when you turn it out. Because that's the work that you put into it when you put it together. Now, I've probably done more than I need to here as I was talking to you, but all you need is for this to be in a nice, firm ball. And then it goes into our banneton. Bit of rice flour over the top. Shower cap back on, and this now goes into the fridge. And the whole purpose of it going into the fridge is for it to firm up, to help give it shape, but also for it to create more flavour in the dough. So this is when the flavour and the texture really develops. Now I know this can be a sticking point for people, so I'm going to do this again to show you the action again of pulling the dough together. I'm just going to put this one in the fridge. So here we are again, we're back with a bowl of dough just to show you the action again because it is something I'm asked about so often. So we're doing this for a round banneton. Can do things for oval bannetons, that's going to be in future videos. So we're just pulling it up and over, right across. Don't just tickle it and pull it in a little bit and hope it's going to stay, because it won't. It needs to be really firm, up and across. Really push it in. So you're pulling it into, look at those bubbles. Yes, you need to squash the bubbles. I get that question as well. I'm worried about squashing the bubbles. You need to squash the bubbles. If you don't, again, it's not going to have any structure. So forget this fear of, oh, I don't want to ruin all the bubbles. they'll all come back. That's the whole point of you making a good strong dough. So push it tightly, tightly, so you get it into your nice, lovely ball. And again, we're into the banneton. Bit of rice flour over the top. Shower cap on. This we'll now put in the fridge for at least 3 hours, because in the fridge it needs to take a while for it to cool down from room temperature to then cool off, and for it to firm up, create its shape and develop its flavour. But also the time in the fridge, that also helps with life. You can shove it in the fridge and bake it when you're ready. So it can be in there for 3 hours, 10 hours. If you've made a strong enough dough, 24 hours, even longer. Okay, so for everyone that asks me, is the fridge time necessary? Yes, it is, because it will help you create a good firm dough when you turn it out, which you will see in the next part. So that is the shaping of our dough into the banneton, ready to go into the fridge. We're back with my dough, which has been in the fridge for about 4 hours now. And what we want to do is turn it out into the pan and score it and bake. So the question of why do you score the dough? It encourages it to grow. You could easily turn out your loaf and bake it without scoring it, and it will still grow and bake. It just won't grow as much. So it comes back to that old saying of letting the devil out. It's just to encourage the growth. You can get into pretty scoring. I don't go down that route. I just want to score my loaf so that it's going to bake well, and I always tend to score them the same way. If you were just starting out with sourdough, I would recommend scoring like I do for the first few loaves. If you want to get into pretty scoring, that comes later. So I want to turn this dough into this pan, but you don't just tip it. So let me show you. I've got my pan, as I mentioned earlier. So this is my 26 centimetre Falcon enamel pan. I've got it lined with some parchment paper, good quality parchment paper, so that it doesn't stick to your loaf. So when you take your dough from the fridge in your banneton, you'll see it's firmed up. By keeping the shower cap on it, you've stopped it from drying out. And again, there's probably going to be some condensation in there. I often get asked the question of, does my dough need to grow in the fridge? No, it doesn't. Your dough only needs to grow in the pan. So if it doesn't grow much in your banneton, don't worry, because all that matters is how it grows in the pan. So I want one hand underneath my banneton. I'm going to put my parchment paper over the top, pan over the top of that, and then turn it out. Okay? If you just tip the dough into your pan, you're going to again risk losing that shape on it. And here we have our lovely ball of dough, our nice shaped dome of dough from being in our banneton, with those lovely concentric lines from the banneton. And then we want to score. I tend to score from the outside in. You want to score quite deeply. Don't worry if your dough starts to spread at this point, as mine is, because all that matters is how it bakes, not what it does at this point. So just going to score it, lid on, and into the oven. So I'm going to put this in the oven and then explain a bit more. My dough is now in the pan and in the oven. And as an extra tip and something that surprises people, I don't preheat the oven. You don't need to preheat the oven or the pan. So there are many recipes out there that have you preheating the oven to very high temperatures for an hour with an empty pan in for hours. A huge waste of energy, and you also end up having a very, very hot pan to deal with. I don't do any of that. So I don't preheat the oven, I don't preheat the pan. I put my cold dough into my cold pan, into the cold oven, and then I turn on the oven. Mine is a fan oven, which you might be able to hear. So I bake my loaf at 220 degrees centigrade, fan assisted, for 55 minutes from a cold start. So that means I put the pan in the oven. I then turn the oven on and the timer for 55 minutes. You don't need to wait for the oven to come up to temperature and then put the timer on. The timer goes on from the point you put the dough into the oven. So if you've got a non-fan or a conventional oven, it's 240 degrees. If you're baking in the States, you're either baking at 425 degrees Fahrenheit or 450, depending on what kind of oven you've got. But you can all do it from a cold start. It doesn't matter if you use a lightweight pan like mine, a cast iron pan, whatever you've got. If you've got a Dutch oven, it all works. If you open your loaf, if you open the pan later and you think that your dough or your loaf is slightly pale, you can always put it back in. So I bake my loaves with the pan on for the whole time, and I get lovely golden loaves. If you take the lid off later and you think it's a bit pale, you can always bake it for longer. Each oven is different, so you might need to find your sweet spot. And everybody likes a slightly different colour loaf, so find what the one is for you. And another thing that can sometimes happen, if you take your loaf out and you think that the base is quite well done, that will depend on where the heat is coming in your oven. If you have uneven heat in your oven, or if you have, say, an element at the bottom or a gas oven, so the heat comes up and hits the base of the loaf first, so that the base of your loaf is very dark and hard to cut. Try placing some tin foil inside your pan, a tray further down the oven to try and disperse the heat away from the base of your loaf. But there's always easy tweaks, and you'll find there's a whole load of tips on my website. There's even a tips index on the website, as well as in my books. So the loaf is now in the oven, and we will be back to show you the baked loaf in just a second. So here we are. The oven is going to beep in about 15 seconds. So you'll be able to see the loaf as it comes straight out of the oven. What you'll see is I've kept the lid on for the whole time, and you should see, hopefully, a nice golden colour. There we go. So here's my pan. Let's do the often described as the best part of the process, and here is our loaf. Our very lovely loaf. So if I just use the parchment paper to lift it out, you can see there our very, very happy loaf. So what I tend to do is keep the parchment paper for later. I'm just going to move this pan so it doesn't cook me whilst I talk to you. So here is our very happy sourdough loaf. I think we've done good. So hopefully what you've seen through this process is how simply this can be done. There is an awful lot of information online that can confuse you, can scare you when it comes to making sourdough, but it doesn't have to be that way. And if you follow the way that I do things, you'll find it can be done really simply. You can fit it in with life. If at any point in the process life gets in the way and you need to leave the house, you need to do something different, just take that bowl of dough with its shower cap on and shove it in the fridge. And then you bring it to a halt, because the fridge in the cold is what will put it to sleep. So if you need to leave it, just put it in the fridge, leave it there, and then when you come back, you take it back out of the fridge and carry on where you left off. So you don't have to be a slave to this at all, not at all. The same situation, if you fed your starter to make dough and then you don't get around to doing it that day, just stick it in the fridge. And then when you do come to make dough, you can just spoon it straight out of the jar. You don't need to feed it again. You don't need to do anything else with it. So there's some really simple and easy ways for you to be making sourdough. And again, just as a reminder, I use the Churchill's flour to make this loaf, but you could use any of these flours in exactly the same way as I've shown you and produce exactly the same thing. So we will be making more videos. I'll be able to show you using different flours in the dough, adding different flours to your dough, adding different ingredients even to your dough, maybe putting some seeds across the top. So there's so many different things that you can do, but this is your basic standard sourdough loaf. And now your challenge is to leave it alone. If you cut into this loaf right now, it's still cooking, and you will end up with a very gummy loaf because the steam will fill all of those holes and it won't be at its best. I understand the urge to want to cut straight into it. When I made my first ever sourdough loaf, that's what I did. It came out the oven, I cut straight into it and ate half of it straight off. I then learned it's worth waiting at least an hour. For me, I would leave that now, probably even till tomorrow, just sitting on its rack, not doing anything else with it. And it will cool down and, you know, dry out and be everything that you want it to be. But if you can't wait and you slice into it and you want some butter melting through it, then go for it. But just remember, if it seems a bit gummy, that's why. So if there's any issues with any point of the process or anything that isn't clear, then do feel free to get in touch and ask questions. But really all you need to do is follow the steps. The only times that things might need to be tweaked is if you have soft water, or if you have a softer flour, or if you have a warmer home. If you have an Aga in your kitchen, or you live somewhere warmer and therefore your kitchen is warmer, these things can all be managed. You'll find all the answers either in my books or on my website. But you can make sourdough. Anyone can make sourdough. Whatever your kitchen is like, you can do this. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope you'll give it a go. And look, I hope you enjoy your loaves. So thank you for watching. I've been Elaine from Food Bod Sourdough, and we've been using Matthew's Cotswold flour today. And enjoy. Happy baking.